Good morning, friends. Oh my goodness, what an odd world we all live in right now. So I know how Star Trek this must feel. Looking at my face up on the screens and seeing this pre recorded video message rather than having your sermon delivered in person by somebody standing right in your pulpit right now in real time. I really thank you so much for your patience, for your flexibility, and for your faith. So, we got an interesting phone call at our house this week on Wednesday night from the principal at Daniel's school. And she was calling because she wanted to let us know that one of Daniel's classmates has COVID-19. And because of that, Daniel's entire class, including his teacher and his teacher's aides, all have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Oof. So Sean and I and our other 2 kids aren't technically required to quarantine because we're considered secondary exposures. But I love you. I pray for you. I care for you. I worry for you. And when I know for a fact that I have this exposure, secondary or otherwise, to COVID-19, when I know that it's reached my circle, I just can't risk any of you being part of that. So I appreciate your prayers as I socially distance for the next 2 weeks while homeschooling my 7-year-old. Oh, what fun times we'll have. Like, seriously, pray for me. Oddly, as it turns out, it might help this sermon a little bit that you're watching this over a video rather than seeing it live. It might give a little bit more space to a topic that promises to be controversial, and it might give us enough space to make this topic something that we can explore together. This week's Preacher Stumpin' topic comes from a friend named Sarah. She's a member at a congregation that I served in the past. And when I opened up Stump the Preacher to anybody who can reach me on Facebook, Sarah was very quick to respond, and she got straight to the point. She wrote one word in the comment box: murder. So I wrote Sarah back and said, care to say a little bit more about that? And she clarified what I thought she meant in the first place. Can we ever justify taking a life? I wager that this would be a controversial sermon topic on any Sunday, no matter when it happened. But on this particular Sunday, when we're standing on the crossroads of some major heavy lifting, this topic feels especially pointed and yet exactly what we should be talking about right now. The state of Texas just passed the strictest abortion law that I know of in our country, banning all abortions that happen after week 6 of pregnancy. Now, it's very hard to say anything at all about abortion from the pulpit. This is a topic that even the boldest of pastors tend to shy away from, and for some very good reasons. It's upsetting. It's triggering. It's bound to cause some arguing between you and your mother-in-law on the car ride home this afternoon. And most of us, if we've heard anything at all from the pulpit about abortion, we've heard some abusive, boundary-crossing, demeaning messages that are meant to shame the women in this room. You won't be hearing any of that from me. And abortion is a part of our world, part of medical care, and part of life and death and life. And not something uncommon either. 1 in 3 women will seek abortion care before they turn 45. We can handle this, and we should talk about it. Now, I feel obligated to clarify for y'all who haven't been pregnant recently that if you hear abortions banned after 6 weeks and your response happened to be, well, hey, that gives a pregnant person a month and a half to decide what they're going to do. The earliest that most of us can possibly find out that we're pregnant medically is at 4 to 5 weeks pregnant, based on how pregnancies are dated. And a lot of people don't know that they're pregnant until much later on in the first trimester or even early in the second trimester, especially if their cycles were irregular or if they weren't planning or trying to conceive. So this new law in Texas effectively bans nearly all abortions under all circumstances. And it does so under the belief that life begins at conception. To end that life for any reason is murder. And at 6 weeks, your doctor may be able to detect a fetal heartbeat, making the decision to terminate a pregnancy all that much more difficult for those who might see even the blinking of very early cells as a sign of life. So while we're stressing over this news, while gun control legislature rolls throughout the nation, hoping to prevent any more mass shootings and the lives that are taken with them, while our troops come home from Afghanistan, marking the end of our country's longest war, while also giving the Taliban the in that they were waiting for to snuff out, if not the lives, but the livelihoods of Afghan women and girls. While we grieve the 13 killed and 18 wounded by the suicide bombers at the Kabul airport, while we witness horrifying images of refugees desperate to flee their homeland and come to the United States to save their lives or have a better one, while we begin a third school year affected by the coronavirus pandemic, while we mask and disinfect and do anything that we can to stop the spread as the Delta variant sweeps the nation and packs the hospitals, and many still refuse the masking and vaccination that could stop this virus and prevent countless deaths. And while we grieve losses of life that have affected ourselves, our families, and our communities, we also observe this weekend the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. The deadliest attack to ever happen on American soil, and a day that, according to research, most of us believe forever changed life in the United States. We're thinking about where life begins, where life ends, and how to protect it now more than ever. As Christian people, our scriptures teach us to value life. God names "you shall not murder" 7th in the 10 Commandments. God pleads with the Hebrews to choose faith in their Creator and thereby choose life. Jesus tells us that he came that we may have life and have it abundantly. He says he is the way, the truth, and the life. The evangelist John tells us that Jesus is the light and the light is the life for all people. Jesus died and rose again to conquer suffering and death, that we may have everlasting life. There's little that we value more, little that we celebrate more as Christians than life. The United Methodist Church teaches us all to place extraordinary value on life, but also recognizes the complexities and nuances that we face in making decisions about life and death. The UMC teaches that war is incompatible with the nonviolent teachings of Christ, but also that war may be the only solution to stop deadly tyranny in this world. Sometimes we take the lives of those who do evil in order to save the innocent. The UMC expresses deep concern for the toll that gun violence has taken on this world, and especially on the lives of children and youth, and supports gun control measures. The UMC very much wants to stop the long-held stigma that a death by suicide has held in the Christian church, and seeks to educate all people about mental health in order to save lives. The UMC supports countless positions that all seek to preserve life, and you can find all of them explained in great detail in something called the Book of Resolutions, the United Methodists Manual on Socio-Political Beliefs, or something that makes a good step stool if you can't quite reach the next highest shelf. Either one. The UMC supports the troops, abhors lead paint, believes in paying a living wage, encourages single-payer health care where possible, desires prison reform, urges compassion toward refugees, fights for safe and affordable housing, and pushes us towards stewardship of the Earth's resources to stop climate change. But the UMC is also gloriously diverse, and while our denomination publishes official stances on these issues, those of us sitting right here in the pews are not on one mind on any of them, as I am sure you are all very well aware. We have really important questions that we have to ask ourselves when we grapple with these issues of life and death and the justification of ending a life. Where does life begin? Is it at conception, or implantation, or birth? Can we justify taking a life when we believe that the person will have a horrible time living in this world? Should we use abortion as a means of preventing children from being born surrounded by poverty, addiction, abuse, or homelessness? Should we use abortion to prevent babies from being born with devastating health problems or disabilities or deformities? Where does life end? If a person has a terminal illness that will cause them tremendous suffering and pain before they pass, can we argue that the life they wanted for themselves is over and that they'd be justified in pursuing euthanasia? If a person is in a persistent vegetative state and unlikely to ever come out of it, but their heart could keep beating for years if they were put on life support, what's the compassionate choice to make? If a person goes into cardiac arrest and performing CPR, breaking their ribs in the process, and putting all kinds of stress on their body could resuscitate them, is that resuscitation worthwhile? Where is the line in taking a life out of self-defense? Can we justify the death penalty? Do our scientific advances in medicine and biology push us into territory that we shouldn't explore? What should we believe about genetic engineering, cloning, or stem cell research? Now, many a Christian minister have taught their flocks to have hard, prescribed beliefs about all of these issues of life and death. But I'm not that kind of minister. And I don't believe Jesus was that kind of teacher. So rather than sit all of his disciples down and say, okay, listen up, all of you, I do not want to hear 4 different versions of this just floating around someday. Jesus addressed the concerns of his disciples by opening up the issue to look at its most vital pieces within. He does this throughout the Sermon on the Mount, and I used a portion of that to address the topic of this week's sermon. And actually, as chances have it, we're picking up right where we left off last week. So Jesus' disciples had been very familiar with the law of Moses. They believed, "You shall not murder." And they also believed an eye for an eye in retaliative justice, meaning it is wrong to take life. But if you need to seek vengeance for a harm visited upon you or someone you love, you could only repay what was done to you. If someone poked out your eye, you can't respond by killing them. You can only escalate to the point of taking a life if a life has already been taken by your adversary. Jesus teaches his disciples to think much more critically about life and death than they ever had before. He counsels them that murder is wrong, but no less wrong is the anger and hatred that eventually leads to murder. Jesus teaches us that yes, life is sacred, but simply preserving life for life's sake is not good enough. Instead, we have to see beyond the ultimate taking of life and look at what leads up to it and what comes from it. So, coming back around to the issue that scares a lot of us the most, abortion. Life is sacred. Every person is sacred. God knit you together in your mother's womb and can count every hair on your head. The cells and tissue that could someday become a baby living in the outside world matter. I'm a mom. I feel this very, very deeply. But we have no right to become angry about potential lives being snuffed out by abortion in the womb if we're not going to address all of the issues that lead a person to consider abortion in the first place. A Benedictine nun by the name of Sister Joan Chittister put it best way back in 2004 when she said, "I do not believe that just because you're opposed to abortion, that makes you pro-life. In fact, I think in many cases, your morality is deeply lacking. If all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed. And why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life. That's pro-birth." Pastor Natalie's personal opinion on abortion goes like this. If you want to prevent abortion, then support families, support women, support moms. Get out and vote. Create a world into which no one would fear bringing a newborn baby. And then trust those of us who have a uterus to decide what is best for it. Throughout the world, countries that have the strongest social safety nets have the lowest abortion rates. And yet, largely also make abortion safe and easily available for the sake of the health of their citizens. The United Methodist Church teaches that the beginning and end of life belong to God and God alone. Yet, we humans live a complicated existence that has us taking life in our own hands. When we do, we must remember how much responsibility we're holding, responsibility entrusted to us by our Creator. We need to make adult choices with that responsibility, choices that examine the road that led us to where we are, and then consider the far-reaching consequences of our actions. And at the end of the day, we have to surrender our feelings and desires of control over all things, including life and death, to God, knowing that God holds us all in the palm of the divine hand. Amen.